Thank you. Hello, everyone. So my name's Connor. This is Karis. We are both on the youth panel for Kids in Museums. And last year we held our Kids in Museums, The Future is Now Museum Youth Summit, targeted for 16 to 25-year-olds. And today we are going to share some of the findings from that and some of our research that's led from that on behalf of Kids in Museums and what potentially the way forward is. As we mentioned, there will be questions at the end, so please hold them for now. That'd be brilliant. So the Kids in Museums mission is, for those who don't know, to work with museums nationwide to make them more welcoming of children, families, and young people in its totality, so not exclusive in any way. You can also find us on the sector support section just over there. If you have any other questions and would like to talk to staff, please feel free to as well. For today, we would love to highlight and share the key findings of our youth summit that we ran last year in October in Birmingham. We would love to gain your perspective as attendees. Yes, we're getting interactive. Let's get excited on these findings and the future of young people in the sector. And we would love to explain the steps that we are going to take as a Kids in Museums team and as a youth panel to act on these findings. So, a bit of a three-pronged attack today. Just a little bit about our summit. It was ran in October of 2023, as we said, and it was based on the DCMS and Morris Hargreaves McIntyre research that shows that only 12% of 16 to 24-year-olds felt London museums told stories that were relevant to them, which is obviously not an ideal figure. The event aimed to enable young people aged 16 to 25 to tell us what they wanted to see from museums from their own mouths and help us change the perspectives thereafter. So as we said, we'll share the feedback today from the young people who attended and let you know what they thought. But first, I will hand over to Karis.
Thanks, Connor. So now we're going to get started with our interactive activity for today to get you thinking about current museum provisions for young people and to try and put yourselves in young people's shoes. So what we'll be doing is asking some questions that we asked our delegates on the day, among other questions. And we want to see how close your answers are. Now, on the day, we used the online format of Mentimeter, but today we're taking it old school, no tech. So there'll be two types of questions. One, which is a poll where you can show if you agree, disagree, or feel neutral by raising your hand. And the second type is going to be a discussion question. And for that, we'd ask you to make a new friend, turn to the person next to you, and share some ideas on what you think. Okay, so to start, this wasn't a question we asked on the day, but as this is the museum show, we want you to reflect. How successful do you feel the current provisions in your museum are for young people? So we're looking at, it's mostly a neutral, a couple of negatives, a couple of positives, which are good to see. And now we'll get on to the questions we asked our delegates. Okay, so first off, how aware are young people of the different job roles in museums?
Interesting. We are going to come on to that, which is not interesting.
So that looks like a big, overwhelming no. However, positively, our delegates did say that on the whole that they were aware of the different museum job roles that there were. There were still some who felt neutral or unaware, but on the whole, it was a more positive response. Next up, how confident are young people that they know the skills needed to apply for a job in a museum? Again, it feels so sad seeing so many negative hands, but there's a lot of negatives, a lot of neutrals. But again, actually, our delegates might have pleasantly surprised you. They felt on the whole that they did feel confident that they had the skills. However, compared to the last question, you can see that there is a growing amount of neutral or unconfident responses. Next up is our first discussion question. Yay. We'd ask you to turn to the person next to you just for a minute and say, what are the barriers to museum employment for young people?
No idea if this is on or not.
I don't think it is. I think it's all sorted now. I don't know what I'm in it. When do you think?
Ten more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Looking back at us, please. Feeling very much like a teacher.
Okay, so we'll come back in now to hope you had a good discussion. So these are some of the responses that our young people said. And as you can see, there is an absolute range of responses. These can be seen across a few different categories. One is the idea of feeling eligible for roles in the first place, whether that's views on higher education holding them back, having a lack of qualifications, or needing to work for free, which is inaccessible for so many people. On top of that, there's the theme of a lack of transparency. So that's about the exclusive, scary stereotypes of museums that need to be demystified, as well as a lack of information around applying for jobs, which can fuel a lack of confidence and anxiety around applying. And then finally, a barrier is continuing jobs once you've entered them, which can involve things like patronizing management, a lack of flexible hours, a generational gap causing issues, and also having to move or take second jobs. Okay, so for our next question, would young people go to a museum based on something they saw on Instagram or TikTok? There was a really strong thumbs up at the back. Thank you. That was really enthusiastic. But yeah, on the whole, that was a very positive response from around the room. And our young people agreed. So it does show that even though we're a generation who doesn't necessarily always want to be on the internet, we do enjoy social media as well. Next up, do young people feel it matters how they engage with museums? So is visiting the cafe the same as visiting displays?
So, yes, it does matter. No, it doesn't matter.
So that's probably the most mixed response I think we've seen so far.
Yeah, definitely.
And our young people felt that it did matter how they experienced museums on the whole, thinking that visiting the displays was different and more important to just visiting the cafe. So next up, another discussion. We ask you to just have a think about what are young people's motivations for visiting museums?
They're not. No one's like. Yeah.
I tried to find last time.
These are cops. Make sure.
I looked in my room. I was like, I can't find these. It's like,
10 more seconds.
okay, and we're going to come back now. Thank you for taking the time to discuss those questions as well. So, again, from our young people, we got a range of responses, and they can be broken down in a few different ways. So, one key theme was the idea of having an accessible social experience that had good facilities. So, whether that's that museums are safe and relaxing spaces, which are free, they can be enjoyed as a shared social experience, and they have things like cafes and shops to make use of. On top of that, something that occurred again and again was the idea of learning and feeling inspired. So this might be going to a museum for interest in the subject, just wanting to learn and explore new things, or your curiosity to follow up something you've seen on social media. Now we've seen why young people want to go to museums. Now just take a minute to discuss what are the barriers to young people visiting museums.
10 seconds.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now to move on to the answers from our young people to that question. The key themes that came up were problems about travel, particularly for young people who don't have the autonomy in owning their own vehicle yet, knowing where to find the museums and what times they're open, and also the entry price is something that can put young people off. So we're coming towards the end of our interactive session now, but the penultimate question, do young people feel considered as an audience and represented in museums? So this is thinking about what's on display and who's created the content.
Yes, they are represented. No, they're not.
So on the whole, that's a big thumbs down response. And that's largely what our young people had to say as well. So the most popular response being disagree, closely followed by a neutral response, and then a strongly disagree. And then finally, do young people feel that currently museum exhibitions and collections are relevant to them? I think that was almost an all negative response in the room. Sad. However, as you can see from our findings, young people also felt similarly. Now, you might see that the most popular response on this is neutral. But what we have to say to that as the youth panel is that apathy and ambivalence are not enough, despite barriers, because as we've shown with the rest of these questions, there is clear interest from young people wanting to be involved in the sector and visit museum spaces. Now I'm going to pass back to Connor to go through the rest of our findings.
Thank you for talking, sharing your hands. That bit's over now, don't worry. So some of our other key findings. Firstly, it's definitely important to note, and this was almost a direct quote from one of the people there, we were asked not to sugarcoat things. So as you can tell, we are not today. Our delegates highlighted a large number of barriers to employment, ranging from nationality, qualification level, stereotypes of museums, the need to volunteer. So for example, the typical cycle of needing to volunteer to get a job, but you need to have a job in order to pay the bills so that you have time to volunteer. And how does it all fit into that? Similarly, delegates saw a disparity between their dream museum job and what they're assigned on work experience. So from our experience of the sector, work experience quite often consists of front of house, social media, admin work. That's not necessarily what young people actually want to be doing on their work experience. So it's about having those open conversations right from the beginning about asking them how it can be a mutually beneficial relationship for both partners. Interestingly, delegates knew both where to find the vacancies and what skills were needed for the roles, just like we showed in our quiz. So does this therefore mean that the problem lies with museums rather than the applicants? I'm not saying the answer is yes, I'm just posing the question. Importantly, over 90% of our delegates did not feel considered as an audience or represented in museums. They also indicated that museum exhibitions and collections were not always relevant to young people. This goes beyond employability and careers and to museum experience. So for example, do we focus on children and families as an audience and adults as an audience and forget who is in between? Should we be focusing them as an audience in their own right? Do we need to make them their own audience group? Do you already? If you are, great, please let us know. However, it is not all bad news. Delegates remained passionate about the museum sector and their potential future in it. Or we can see this from a range of sources, for example, university admissions into museums courses and cultural heritage courses and how many of them are taking off. It was also overwhelmingly clear that they wanted museums to listen more and be able to share power and decision making to more young people as equal partners. Emphasis on the last bit. Change can happen as long as museums listen, that being the key takeaway, letting young people into the room for whatever conversation that might be. So for example, another statistic to give you, only 0.5%, 0.5 of charity trustees are currently under the age of 24. That is 30% of the UK population. I'm not saying we need 2-year-olds in the boardroom, although that would be a very interesting discussion, but it's one to think about. So what do these findings mean for the sector? Potentially a review of the way people engage with museums. Is there a need or is there a want to emphasize the collection, or is visiting the cafe just as important? We saw in the interactive quiz that potentially the museum is important in terms of its collection to young people, as are things like museum lights or cafes and things like that. So it's an interesting concept. Motivations for visiting museums, therefore, saw a vast range of responses from relaxation to free admission. Why are young people visiting? There is no one set answer, but there are lots of foreseeable answers like cost, not just technology. When asked how they engage with museums content, there was our complete and clear emphasis on technology enabling a good visit, but not hindering the overall experience. Technology should not replace quote unquote normal interpretation. The use of tech is good. It should not be the be all and end all. It's not the only way to engage this group. How did our delegates see the Museum of the Future? Technology does come into play here, but not necessarily in the way you might expect. It further illustrates the point that a layered interpretive approach does certainly work best. And it's interesting that artistic, playful, and open responses really stand out on this list clearly too. There are no limits to what a museum can and should be to a young person. And again, clearly emphasized is the point of having a say, being listened to, feeling of inclusion and understanding, and being welcomed into a museum or heritage space, whatever that may be.
So now we've talked a bit about what museums can do to take on board the thoughts of our delegates. For the changes our delegates envisage to happen, it can't be the case that all the decision-making power is held by the institutions that have always held it. So as the Kids in Museums Youth Panel, we've reflected on what we can do to enact the changes that we want to see. Oh, your slide.
Oh, sorry, carry on.
We've jumped a slide. Sorry. Please forgive me. We've jumped a slide. I'll go back to this. So how can museums attract young people? We say pay young people for their time. Work with existing youth groups to better represent communities and highlight career pathways. Use discounts for young people not in education, as only having student discounts cuts out so many people. Use sound and video to make museums more accessible. Include working class histories to reflect a more diverse audience. And empower young people to return independently after their school trips. So, to return to the slide I thought we were on, I do apologise. As a youth panel, we reflected on the changes that we wanted to make. So, delegates voted clearly in favour of a National Youth Museum project, led and run by young people. Now, this is quite a large undertaking and a big idea, and it can't happen overnight, but we are listening and we are working on thinking about it. Equally, delegates asked for a way to connect with other young museum professionals and wanted their museums to be heard in museum boardrooms. So keep those two ideas in mind, as they might reappear in the next two slides. As well as ourselves, young people across museums have the power to enact change as well. We encourage you to share these steps with any young people you work with or know. Firstly, we say join a youth panel, advisory group, or become a young trustee. Now, again, that might sound a bit daunting. Sometimes the opportunities aren't there, and it's easier said than done. But there's plenty of opportunities out there. For example, Kids in Museums have just launched their projects with 8 museums across the country to start with their first young trustees. We have our own young trustee of Kids in Museums here. That's Joe. And if you want to find out any more information about that, then please head over to the Kids in Museums store today to have a chat with them. As well as this, we say, be drivers for change. Use your voice to speak up for other young people and represent them. And be the change that you want to see. And if you are able to involve other young people in your work, then do, because that is invaluable. And it helps to contribute to a growing network of young professionals. Now, seamlessly linking from a network of young professionals. On the youth panel, we've been trying to create a Discord group for young museum professionals to connect, where we can share advice, opportunities, and just have a conversation about what it's like in the sector. Now, the group's not fully established yet. We're still kind of working through it. But as you can see on the slide, there is a QR code. And if you scan that, it'll take you to a form where once we've got it up and running, we can send an invite for you to join. You can also scan that and share it with any young people you work with, because we hope the more the merrier, and it should be a really great group. Oh, I'll go back. Sorry, I'll give you a minute to scan it if anyone hadn't already. Okay. Okay, so then finally, how can you, the sector, help to enact change? Well, Kids in Museums have written an open letter, well, the youth panel have written an open letter recently that should be coming out soon, addressed to change makers in the sector. What we're going to outline in this letter is what museums can do to support young people better in museums as visitors, workers, and as decision makers. This is coming out next week. We're really excited about it. And we encourage you to keep an eye out for it on our social media at Kids in Museums and talk about it using hashtag Museum Youth, which is what we use for whatever we're up to. And there's a way to get involved with our open letter rather than just reading it. You can make a change. So, following our open letter, we're going to ask museums to pledge to make one change to their provisions for young people based on some options we have in a list. Once you've chosen an option and talked to Kids in Museums about it, you'll then have a year to make that change. It's a great way to be held accountable to make a positive impact for young people. So, for example, one such thing might be if you offer discounted tickets for young people, how easy is it to find out how to obtain these tickets on your website or on site? Changing that simple thing can actually make such an impact for visitor experience and hopefully increase the number of young visitors that you have. So that brings us to the end of the main body of our presentation. And at this time, I'd just like to say thank you on behalf of the whole Kids in Museums Youth Panel who've put together this presentation and designed its ideas. We hope that the findings from our Youth Summit have been helpful to you and can influence future steps that you take to ensure that museums are empowering and inclusive spaces for young people. Now, if you have any questions, myself and Connor are happy to take any.
Thank you so much. Did you want to take a seat? And I'm going to open the next 10 minutes or so to Q&A. And please, if you can only ask your question when the mic comes to you. Question here, over here, and over here. Thank you.
Um, I'm probably showing my ignorance here, but whenever I hear the phrase, a museum is not relevant to me, what does that actually mean? Because as you were talking, I was thinking, well, I went to a coal mining museum the other day. I'm not a coal miner. It's not about me. It's not relevant to me. But that's why you go to a museum. So what does this phrase actually mean?
I think when we say this, is that on? Can you hear? Yeah. And when we say this, what we mean is that the way that museums are expressing what they have in their history isn't engaging to young people. So this might be that is in a format that, for example, neurodivergent young people just find too hard to engage with. It's not stimulating. It's not interesting. I'm not from a coal mining background as well, but I'm sure I could have an enjoyable experience in a coal mining museum if it was done in a way that it could connect to young people's histories or working class histories, for example, whether that's just highlighting what it was like specifically for children who had to leave education to go down and work in the mines. Something like that. It just comes across quite often that museums are aimed at adults and children, and the people in between get forgotten about.
Absolutely. I definitely echo that. It's about being considered in the space.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Can I invite you?
Hello, I was just wondering, in the delegates that took part in the survey, what obviously I know it's Kids in Museums 16 to 25, but what was the age distribution across that? Because I know experiences are very different from if you're 16 to whether you're 25.
Was that, sorry, at the summit specifically or just in general? Yeah. So at the summit, 18. Yeah, 18 to 25 at the summit. Karis was there, so I'll let you talk a little bit more.
Yeah. So the summit itself, we held it at a think tank, and it was 18 to 25-year-olds. It was a mix of mainly university students and current young museum professionals. As a youth panel, we are 16 to 25, and part of the great thing about that is that we get to share the experiences, whether it's secondary school students and early professionals. There is a range within that, but we did find that across that there are common threads that unite us and similar issues that frustrate us.
Thank you so much. I know we've got a question over here, and please do put your hand up if you have any further questions. Thank you.
It was just a question, I guess, following on from the last one around young people that don't really engage with museums at all and kind of bringing in their thoughts and their opinions, because I guess with the audience of the delegates, young museum professionals and university students, they're probably more likely to go to a museum anyway. But whether there has been any input from young people that really don't engage with museums and maybe have a more negative opinion of museums or how they relate to them?
Sorry, from what I picked up about young people who don't necessarily input or see themselves in museums at all, rather than people who aspire to a career, etc. Yeah. So, yep, absolutely. We definitely are missing that, I guess, gap in the market currently, and our target audiences and who we speak to a lot of the time. And we do try and reach out with some of the training and things that we do provide. I would also say that is something that museums themselves can do as well. We're all aware that we try and make our audiences as broad as possible, and that we want everyone to come through the door. So I would say it's a two-way relationship, that one.
Yeah, I think it's a group that aren't reflected in our statistics because our event was aimed at young people who are already interested in the sector. But one thing we did highlight was wanting to make sure kids go back after school trips independently. That's a massively important thing. So museums can think about what they offer to school groups, potentially offering volunteering for Duke of Edinburgh and things like that, which aren't necessarily museum interest based. Then hopefully that can be a way to get more young people in.
Thank you. There's another question. Thank you.
Carlos here. Thank you. First of all, thank you for that presentation. It was so interesting and really well presented. So thank you for that. I'm just being nosy now, really, about the panel. I'm just really interested to know from both of you about sort of what brought you to the panel, why you wanted to take part in that project.
Yeah, sure. So I guess my route is a little bit more stereotypical. I currently work in the sector. I did my museum studies master's degree, and that step by step took me to the panel. But it comes from a love of heritage sites and castles, really. That was where I grew up. That was what I did. And it was based around knowing that I was going into a sector where you're not going to see many of me, particularly in museum education. So how can I make that change? How can I actively go and support that? So actually learning and being on the youth panel has been a massive part of that for me. It's been super beneficial. It's led to me working at my own workplace and creating our own youth panel, which is fantastic. So that's another thing that we've done on top of that. But I think yours is probably a little bit different.
Yeah, so I'm currently still a university student. I'm doing History of Art Masters. I joined about a year ago at the same time as Connor because I'd done an internship in a museum and that flagged me onto the work kids in museums do. What I really care about is making things accessible to young people. So that's why I got to join it. I also got this love of heritage. And while I'm not actually going into the sector straight out of university, I'm really grateful that I've been connected to this group of other young people who care about the sector and that I've constantly got this connection with heritage and museums going on.
Thank you so much. Can I come to you? There's a question just here. Is there any more questions that I haven't seen? Thank you.
Hi, I was really interested to hear about your campaigning around trustees and young people. In terms of arm's length bodies who are sponsored by the DCMS, we have to have our trustees approved. So it was just to see whether kids in museums or widely are doing any campaigning about that we could get involved in or have any thoughts on that more generally.
I'm going to pass on to Laura now, who works with kids in museums, because she knows a bit more about this than me.
Oh, yeah. So as Caris and Connor were saying, we're working with 8 museums at the moment as a sort of pilot to support them to sort of take on their first young trustees. So as part of that project, we're going to be sort of providing guidance and probably more support for the sector around that. It's the first time we've sort of done this programme. We do have a few resources like the Roundhouse in London that has got fantastic resources about taking on first young trustees, which we took on that advice when we took on our first young trustees. But yeah, do have a look on our website on the resources section. But yeah, as we said, we're over there in the sector support section, so come and say hello.
And the young trustee movement, I don't know if you mentioned that there. They're another good support one.
Thank you. And I know there's a question just in the middle over here.
Thank you. Just say thank you as well for your consideration with your answers. They've been really interesting. I just wanted to ask as well if you'd come across anything with the age barriers for entry to museums for young people, because I know that can be quite difficult if they try to go and then they're not allowed because of a certain age or groups of teenagers being seen in particular light.
Yeah, this is actually something we have. So did you know, for example, that there are still some national museums where the official age for an unaccompanied visit is 18? So a 16-year-old with a child would not be allowed in. So that is a really interesting statistic. And it's definitely something we would love to talk more about in terms of how we can build trust in the group, that they're not just going to come in and make a mess of everything and destroy everything, and that there actually are groups of young people like ourselves. We would go and actually enjoy being in the spaces. So I think, yeah, trust is a big part of that.
And I think that might be something that's coming out as part of one of the pledges that museums can take with the open letter that's coming out. One of the pledge options, I think, will be to look at what your age for unaccompanied visits is.
Thank you. I'm just looking to see if there's any more questions. We're nearly at the end. And I just wanted to say thank you. I really enjoyed that it was evidence-led, really, really insightful data. And may I ask you to close, because I think this is a really interesting moment while you've got this captive audience and we're about to, you're setting up this very big challenge that I hope everyone rises to. When you come back next year, and this whole group is in front of you, what will we have achieved? Do you want to tell us like your top 3 wish list?
I mean, for me, and we did talk about it a little bit, it's getting people in the room. I really think there's a misconception about the fact that, I don't know, me as a 24-year-old doesn't have the same experience or understanding as a 50-year-old who sits on a board of trustees, which I think, quite frankly, yes, I don't have the years, but it's just not true. And there are so many other things I can bring to the table, which is a really important thing to be able to listen to. Like we say, if we want to build this age group of 16 to 25 or 16 to 30, whatever we want to call it, and make them a really heard audience group, you need to have them there telling you what they want and how to listen to them.
Yeah, I think I echo that. It's any projects that involve young people, having more equal decision making with young people for those processes. And something I'd love to see is more work experience and internship that take on board what young people actually want out of those experiences. Trying new ways of doing it. Sometimes the week-long model doesn't work. Sometimes long-term things. Try it. See what can be better, and hopefully in a year, more young people will have had a great time.
Thank you. Well, the challenge has now been set, people. I just want to say thank you so much. If I can say, Caris Owens, Connor Brown from Kids and Museums Youth Panel, thank you.
And thank you for listening.